Homework assignment, try it, 21-3. We're going to use all three target profit methods. So going back to our slides, we have three different ways to determine how much we need to sell to reach a certain target profit. For example, let's say the CEO wants to know how many units must we sell if we want to make a $1 million profit. Well, we can use one of these three different methods. And then also notice that some of these formulas, such as contribution margin per unit, are explained over here. And contribution margin ratio is explained over here. So we need to use all of these formulas to calculate how many units this company must sell to reach their target profit. So a furniture manufacturer specializes in wood tables. The tables sell for $100 and incur $40 in variable costs. The company has $6,000 in fixed costs per month. The company desires to earn an operating profit of $12,000 per month. Abbreviation U, CM, stands for contribution margin. All right, the first step, calculate the required sale in units to earn the target profit using the equation method. And remember, our target profit is we want to earn $12,000 per month. So the equation method, going back to our formula, is this first one right here. And this first one is actually the easiest one to understand, but it's kind of clunky with all the steps involved to actually use it. But we'll start off with this one because it's the easiest to understand. So target profit, to reach a target profit, to calculate that, you're going to take your net sales revenue, and then you're going to subtract your two types of costs. There's two types of costs, variable costs and fixed costs. Now you might be thinking, well, where are the mixed costs? Well, mixed costs can be broken down into these two components. So it's just sales revenue minus our two different types of costs. So notice it first says, the first question is, first select the formula to compute the target profit. So it's sales revenue minus variable minus fixed. Net sales revenue minus variable costs minus fixed costs gives us our target profit. And then it says, rearrange the formula you determined above and compute the required sales in units. So now we have to use this clunky method, which is kind of long and laborious. But after we do this long method, I will show you the two shortcut methods, which are much easier. And then you really don't even have to use this longer method. So here's the solution to what we're doing. So notice we've got this formula here is replicated here. So we're going to start with net sales revenue. How do we calculate net sales revenue? Well, it's a sales price per unit, which is $100, times the units sold. Okay, and then our variable costs are the number of units sold times our variable costs. So $40 per unit times units sold. Our fixed costs are $6,000, so we plug that in here, and our target profit is $12,000, so we plug it here. Now we're going to do a little bit of algebra, so we're going to take this $100 per unit times units sold minus $40 per unit times units sold. Combine those, it becomes $100 minus $40 per unit times units sold. And then what we're going to do, to go from this step to this step, we're just going to take 100 minus 40 gives us $60 per unit. And also, to get this minus $6,000 onto the other side, if we add $6,000 to both sides, by adding $6,000 to the left side, we cancel out this $6,000, but we also have to add the $6,000 over here, which is what we've done here. So now to go from this step to here, we're just going to add these two together, so it becomes $18,000. And then to go from this step down to here, we're just going to divide this side by $60 per unit. And remember, what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side. So we have to divide this side by $60 per unit. So the formula becomes units sold equals 18,000 divided by $60 per unit. And then we just do the math. $18,000 divided by 60 gives us 300 units. So what this 300 units means is for this company to reach their $12,000 target profit, they need to sell 300 units. So again, those were a lot of steps, and you really don't even have to use that, even for this problem. But I wanted to show you how it's done. So let's use a shortcut method, which every student I've ever talked to prefers. Now we're going to calculate the required sale in units to earn the target profit. But this time we're going to use the contribution margin method. So going back to our formulas, the contribution margin method is this one right here. Required sales in units, which is what we got here, equals fixed costs plus target profit divided by contribution margin per unit. So it's fixed costs plus the target profit divided by contribution margin, that's what CM stands for, per unit. So we just replicated this second method here, which is super easy to use once you know how to do it. Check our answer. All right, now we just need to plug in the information. So our fixed costs are 6,000. Our target profit is 12,000. And then we got to do contribution margin per unit. So contribution margin per unit is one of our formulas. It's right here. It's also called unit contribution margin. So just know that this is also the same as saying contribution margin per unit. So the formula is sales revenue per unit minus the variable cost per unit. Now I want to go back to the slide that shows that, because this might make it even more understandable. So contribution margin per unit. Remember when Lisa is selling the jeans for 50 bucks and the jeans cost her 30 bucks. So the cost of the jeans is a variable cost because the more jeans she sells, then this cost is going to go up. And the less jeans she sells, this variable cost will go down. So contribution margin per unit, here's a formula again. It's sales revenue per unit. So in this case of the jeans, it's $50 minus her cost, $30, gives us $20 per unit. Okay. And if you forgot what contribution margin means, here's the definition once again down here, which we've gone over so many times. So that's an easy example of how to do contribution margin per unit. So how do we do contribution margin per unit for this problem? Well, again, the formula, according to our little cheat sheet of formulas, it's sales revenue per unit minus variable cost per unit. So sales revenue is 100 minus the variable cost of 60. So that gives us minus variable cost of 40. So that gives us a contribution margin per unit of $60. So here is all the data broken out into all the steps. Notice the contribution margin per unit is on the bottom part, the divisor. So we've got $100 per unit, which came from here, minus $40 per unit, which came from here. So now we just need to do the math. So 18,000, we just added these two up, divided by 60, gives us this same answer, 300. So to be honest with you, when you're doing this method, you do need to know, when you're doing this first method, you do need to know this formula. Because if you don't understand that, then you're kind of in trouble. But you don't have to go through this long, clunky method to figure out this 300. You can just instead use this method to calculate the same 300. All right, now we're going to go on to the next method, calculate the required sales in dollars. All right, so these two methods showed us how many units we need to sell. Now we're going to figure out, well, how much sales dollars do we need to get? In other words, 300 units times 100. So we should get $30,000. But this method is just another way, so we didn't have to use these methods. So it's just a different way to calculate the same thing. So we are on this third method, required sales in dollars. And the formula is fixed costs plus target profit divided by contribution margin ratio. So fixed costs plus target profit divided by contribution margin ratio. Now, question is, well, what's contribution margin ratio? Well, it's right here. Contribution margin ratio is contribution margin divided by sales revenue. Now, the trick to this contribution margin ratio is you can either calculate the contribution margin, which is the formulas up here, revenue minus variable costs, or it's easier if you just turn this into contribution margin ratio using per unit. So in other words, this formula becomes contribution margin per unit divided by sales revenue per unit. So how do we calculate this contribution margin ratio using our actual data? Well, here's a calculation. Contribution margin ratio is the contribution margin per unit, which we calculated right here. And again, the way we calculate this contribution margin per unit is we took the sales price, 100, minus the variable cost of 40, which gives us $60 contribution margin per unit. So it's contribution margin per unit divided by the sales revenue per unit. So $60 divided by 100, and of course I got the 100 from here, gives us 60%. So let's check our answer. Now we just need to plug in the data. Fixed costs come from here, 6,000. Target profit is 12,000. And contribution margin ratio, let me switch back, comes from right here, 60%. Notice it shows it as a percentage, so we need to enter it as 60. It's not a decimal, so don't enter it as 0.6. Now we just need to do the math. So 18,000 divided by 60%. Now, the way we do that is we need to convert the 60% to a decimal. And to do that, you're just going to divide, obviously 60 divided by 100 gives us 0.6 or 0.60. So we're going to take 18,000 divided by 0.6. So clear it, 18,000 divided by 0.6 or 0.60 gives us that $30,000. So what this $30,000 means is to reach this target profit of $12,000, the company has to sell enough wood tables so they have $30,000 in sales. All right, so all those previous scenarios were to try to figure out what we need to do if we want to make $12,000 per month. But in this last scenario, they want us to calculate the required sales in units to break even. All right, so break even means we have a target profit of 0. And notice it says we're going to use the contribution margin method. So the contribution margin method is this second one, required sales in units. Notice that's the same as right here, equals fixed cost plus target profit divided by contribution margin per unit, divided by contribution margin per unit. So that was fixed costs plus the target profit, which in this case is going to be 0, divided by contribution margin per unit. So now we just need to plug in the numbers. So fixed costs are 6,000. Target profit is 12,000. Contribution margin per unit we've already calculated, which is $60. And if you forgot how we calculated the contribution margin per unit, it's right here, $100 per unit, which is the sales price, minus the variable cost of $40 per unit. So now we have $18,000. We just need to do the math. 18,000, these two added together, divide by 60. Excuse me, oops, I screwed up. Target profit is 0. Remember, we're trying to do break even. Break even. So we're ignoring this target profit of $12,000 a month. We want to know, well, what do we need to sell just to break even? So it's 6,000 plus 0 divided by 60. So that's just 100. So what this means is the company needs to sell 100 units just to break even. And if they want to have a target profit of $12,000, they need to sell 300 units. And if they sell 300 units, that's the same as having revenue of $30,000.